I've analyzed 241 black boxes over 11 years, and I've never seen anything like this. The file I opened today isn't a record of an incident. It is the incident. Everything sounded normal until 14 minutes and 31 seconds in, when all 4 channels dropped into perfect digital silence. Then the audio came back, with a voice that wasn't on the crew list, like the recording itself was talking. And the scariest part, when I spoke at my desk, 2 seconds later my voice appeared inside the file. So here's the question. If this recording reached your computer, would you shut it down or listen to the end? My name is Martin Caldwell. I have held a position within the Federal Recovery Analysis Division for 11 years. I am certified in magnetic and solid-state flight data recovery, cockpit voice recorder interpretation, and multi-system telemetry cross-referencing. I have processed 241 black box files in my career. I have been involved in 8 nationally recognized incident reconstructions, and 4 that remain classified under standing national security directives. I have never, in over a decade of this work, filed a formal objection to my own analysis. I have never requested removal from a case. I have never submitted documentation suggesting that a file under review should be destroyed rather than archived. I am submitting all 3 of those requests now simultaneously, with the full understanding that doing so will likely result in the suspension of my clearance and a mandatory psychiatric evaluation. I am submitting them anyway. This document constitutes the complete record of my analysis of the file designated INRA negative 117. It is not a report in the traditional sense. It has become something else. I will do my best to present the material in chronological order, but I want to state clearly at the outset that chronology, as it pertains to this file, is no longer a concept I trust. Let me begin with how the file arrived. The Recovery Analysis Division occupies the 3rd sub-basement of Building 9 at a facility I am not permitted to name. If you are reading this document, you already know where it is, or you have accessed it through channels I cannot predict. In which case, the location will not matter to you. The division consists of 12 analysts, 4 systems engineers, a signals intelligence liaison, and a supervising director, whose name rotates on a quarterly basis. We do not investigate incidents. We do not interview witnesses. We do not visit crash sites. Our function is singular and precise. We receive physical recording devices, flight data recorders, cockpit voice recorders, and in rare cases, auxiliary data modules recovered from sites of interest. We extract, process, interpret, and catalog their contents. That is all. We are the last stage of the pipeline. The devices come to us already decontaminated, already photographed, already logged in the chain of custody system. By the time a unit reaches our lab, it has passed through no fewer than 6 prior agencies or departments. Our role is not to question why a unit has arrived. Our role is to open it and listen to what is inside. On the morning INRA negative 117 entered our workflow. I was already at my station. I tend to arrive early. The sub-basement is quieter before the rest of the staff filters in. The fluorescent lights carry a low, constant hum at minimal occupancy, a 60 Hz drone I have come to associate with the beginning of my work. My station is the 4th from the left in the primary analysis bay. It consists of a reinforced desk, 3 monitors, a waveform analysis suite, running proprietary software I am not permitted to name, and a shielded playback system designed to prevent audio bleed into adjacent stations. The playback system uses circumaural headphones rated for negative 32 decibels of isolation. When I put them on, the outside world effectively ceases to exist. That detail will become relevant later. The unit arrived at 0647 hours in a standard recovery container, a matte gray case, approximately 20 inches by 14 by 9, fitted with dual biometric locks and a tamper-evident seal. It was delivered by an internal courier. I scanned his badge and logged the transfer as protocol requires. His name was David Oren. I had seen him before. He was unremarkable in every respect. He placed the container on my intake shelf. I signed the transfer form on his tablet. He left. The entire interaction lasted less than 90 seconds. The intake form listed the following details. Device type: combined flight data and cockpit voice recorder. Solid state. Manufacturer: unknown. Serial number: pending verification. Recovery site: redacted. Recovery date: redacted incident. Classification: undesignated. Referring agency: a 4-character alphanumeric code 7, key nil. I had never seen a prefix like that before. Every agency I have ever worked with uses a standardized referral system. 2-letter or 3-letter alphabetical codes only. A code beginning with a numeral should not have existed in the system at all. I noted it on my intake checklist, but I did not flag it for review. In 11 years, I have learned that anomalies in referral codes are almost always clerical errors, or newly formed task groups that have not yet been entered into the master directory. I assumed this was one of those cases. I opened the container. The device inside was physically intact. That was my first observation. In most cases I handle, the recording unit shows some degree of damage heat discoloration, impact deformation, water intrusion, chemical residue from fire suppression systems. That is normal. Expected. Black boxes are designed to survive catastrophic events, but survival is not the same as preservation. This unit, however, was clean. Not refurbished clean. Not post-decontamination clean. Clean in the way something looks when it has never been deployed at all. The casing was standard aviation orange. No scratches. No dents. No paint loss. The data port covers were still sealed. The mounting brackets still had their protective caps in place. If I had encountered it without context, I would have assumed it was a factory replacement unit pulled directly from a manufacturer's shelf. I photographed the unit from all required angles and logged the images in the case file. I noted the absence of external damage in my initial condition report. I then connected the unit to my extraction terminal using the standard interface cable and initiated the data pull. This is a process I have performed hundreds of times. The software establishes a handshake with the device, verifies the data format, estimates the total volume of stored information, and begins a bit for bit, mirror onto our secure analysis drive. The process typically takes between 4 and 20 minutes depending on data density. The progress bar appeared on my screen. It estimated an extraction time of 11 minutes. I waited. At the 4-minute mark, the progress bar stopped. This is not unusual by itself. Solid-state devices occasionally produce sector read errors that cause temporary pauses. The software is designed to retry automatically, and in most cases the process resumes within 30 to 60 seconds. I waited. The bar remained frozen at 36% for approximately 2 minutes. Then it jumped to 71%. Instantly, then it froze again. Then it jumped to 100% and displayed a completion message. I found this mildly unusual, not because of the pauses, but because of the jumps. A bit-for-bit mirror does not normally skip ahead. It reads sequentially. If it encounters unreadable sectors, it flags them and continues. But the progress indicator reflects total device volume, not readable segments. For the bar to jump from 36 to 71% in a single frame suggested either a display-level software glitch or a very large section of the device that was completely empty interpreted by the system as null data and processed almost instantly. I made a note of the anomaly and proceeded. The extracted data populated my analysis environment. The first thing I review on any new file is the metadata header. This is the identification block written at the beginning of the data stream. It contains the aircraft registration, flight number, if applicable, timestamp of recording initiation, firmware version, and checksum verification value. In a properly functioning system, this header is always present, always complete, and always readable. It is the first block written when recording begins. The header for in or negative 00117 was present, but it was not complete. The aircraft registration field contained a string that did not conform to any known international format. It read exactly as follows: N-3317 Theta Gamma Null. Standard United States aircraft registrations begin with the letter N followed by up to 5 alphanumeric characters. They do not include Greek letters. They do not include the word null. I checked international standards as well. ECAL. California, A, ESA. None of them matched. It was not a registration number. It was not formatted as a registration number, and I could not determine what it was. The flight number field was blank. The timestamp field read 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds point. Negative. This would normally indicate that the device's internal clock was never set, which is a calibration step performed during installation. For a device to record any data while its clock reads all zeros is technically possible, but procedurally nonsensical. No properly installed unit would ever have a null clock. The firmware version field listed a version number that, when I checked against the manufacturer database, did not exist. The number was higher than the most recent firmware release by several iterations. It referenced a version that had not been published. The checksum value was present and appeared valid in format, but when I ran the verification algorithm, it returned a result I had never seen before. Not a match. Not a mismatch. The system returned a code I had to look up in the software documentation. The code translated to checksum comparison non-applicable. Source format unrecognized. The system was telling me it could not determine whether the data was intact or corrupted because it did not fully understand the structure of the data it was examining. I paused at this point, not out of fear or concern, but out of professional caution. An unrecognized data format arriving through official channels, combined with an unrecognized referral code and no meaningful metadata, is not alarming. It is suspicious. It suggests either a deeply non-standard source, such as a foreign military device or an experimental prototype, or it suggests an error in the delivery pipeline. In either case, the correct procedure is to flag the file for supervisory review before proceeding with analysis. I drafted the flag request and sent it to the supervising director's queue. The director at that time was a woman named Dr. Lena Vasquez. I had worked under her rotation twice before. She was thorough, unhurried, and not prone to alarm. I expected a response within the hour. I received a response in 4 minutes. That was unusual. Dr. Vasquez's reply read, in its entirety, "Proceed with standard analysis. File has been pre-authorized at intake. Do not flag again." I found the tone of this reply somewhat curt, but not outside the range of normal supervisory communication. The phrase, "pre-authorized at intake," was not a term I had encountered before in our internal procedures, but I interpreted it to mean that someone above Dr. Vasquez had already reviewed the file's provenance and cleared it for processing. This happens occasionally with politically sensitive cases. I accepted the instruction and continued. I opened the audio component of the file. The waveform display populated across my center monitor. The standard cockpit voice recording presents as a multi-channel waveform, typically 4 channels. Channel 1 is the captain's audio panel. Channel 2 is the first officer's audio panel. Channel 3 is the area microphone, which captures ambient cockpit sound. Channel 4 is a spare or auxiliary channel that may be connected to a jump seat headset or an additional intercom bus. The waveform I was looking at had 4 channels. That was normal. The total duration displayed was 7 hours, 42 minutes, and 16 seconds. That was also within normal range for a CVR, though on the longer end, as most cockpit voice recorders are designed to retain the most recent 2 hours on a continuous loop, overwriting older material. Some newer solid-state units have expanded capacity, so a longer recording was not inherently anomalous. I began playback from the beginning. Channel 1, the captain's channel, activated first. The audio was crisp. Unusually crisp, in fact. Most recordings I analyze contain some degree of background noise, hiss, electrical interference, or environmental sound that requires filtering before the speech becomes fully intelligible. This recording sounded as though it had been captured in a studio. The first voice I heard was male, calm, with a slight nasality that suggested a Midwestern American accent. He said, and I am transcribing directly from the waveform. Checklist complete, all normal, ready for push. A second voice responded on channel 2, also male, slightly deeper, with no particular regional accent. Copy, push approved. Contact ground on 21.9, channel 3, the ambient microphone, captured what I would describe as expected background. The low hum of avionics, the faint airflow of conditioned cabin air through cockpit vents, and a distant mechanical cycling sound consistent with hydraulic pumps. All of this was entirely normal. It sounded like the beginning of a routine departure. I continued listening. For the next 14 minutes of recorded time, the audio proceeded exactly as I would expect for a standard commercial or military departure sequence. The two voices, which I designated Voice Alpha for Channel 1 and Voice Bravo for Channel 2, communicated with each other and with what appeared to be ground control and tower frequencies, although the external radio communications were only partially captured. As is typical, the CVR records the crew's headset audio but does not independently capture full external transmissions. Voice Alpha and Voice Bravo were professional, calm, and followed standard aviation phraseology. They discussed fuel load, weather conditions, expected routing clearance, and a minor maintenance deferral related to a cabin reading light. Everything was ordinary. If I had been reviewing this file as a routine incident, I would have classified it as unremarkable up to the 15-minute mark. At 14 minutes and 31 seconds, the recording stopped, not faded, not interrupted by a loud event or signal overload. It stopped. All 4 channels simultaneously dropped into absolute digital silence. Not the hiss of an empty tape. Not the low-level noise floor of an idle system. Absolute zero amplitude silence across all channels. This is, technically speaking, nearly impossible in an analog sense, but straightforward in a digital one. It indicates the data stream contained a block of zeros. No signal. But the recording had not ended. The waveform display still extended to the 7-hour, 42-minute mark. The silence simply occupied the space where audio should have been. I checked the duration of the silent section. It lasted exactly 60 seconds. Not approximately 60 seconds. Exactly 60.00 seconds. A perfectly round number inside a data stream that otherwise measured events to the millisecond. This was not natural silence. Natural silence, even in a sealed cockpit with all systems off, still produces ambient noise captured by the area microphone. The microphones on a CVR remain live whenever the recorder is powered. For all 4 channels to register absolute zero for a mathematically perfect duration suggested one of 2 possibilities. Either the data had been deliberately zeroed, which would constitute tampering, or the recording system had entered a state I was not familiar with. I noted the anomaly and continued playback past the 60-second gap. The audio resumed. Voice Alpha was mid-sentence. He was saying, "Don't see it on the scope. Do you have it?" Voice Bravo responded, "Negative. Nothing on TCAs. Might be a paint. Might be nothing." This exchange strongly suggested they were discussing a radar return, possibly traffic or weather, that had appeared and then disappeared from their instrumentation. The tone was not alarmed. It was the tone of mild curiosity. Pilots encounter transient radar returns regularly, and the vast majority are meaningless artifacts. But something about the audio quality had changed after the gap. I could not identify it immediately on the first listen. It was subtle. I rewound and played the pre-gap audio again, then the post-gap audio back and forth several times. Eventually, I isolated what was different. The ambient sound on channel 3, the area microphone, had shifted. Before the gap, the background contained the standard low hum of avionics and air systems. After the gap, that hum was still present, but it was slightly lower in pitch, not in volume. In pitch, the fundamental frequency had dropped by approximately 3 Hz, according to my analysis software. This is the kind of change that would be imperceptible to the human ear in real time, but becomes evident under spectral analysis. A 3 Hz shift in the electrical hum of an aircraft's avionics bus could indicate a change in generator frequency, which in turn could indicate an engine speed change or an electrical system anomaly. I noted it as a potential technical event and continued. The next several minutes of audio were again routine, but with a gradual, almost imperceptible change in atmosphere that I want to describe carefully, because it is relevant to everything that followed. Voice Alpha and Voice Bravo continued their duties. They communicated with what appeared to be an en route air traffic control facility. They discussed altitude assignments, crossing restrictions, and fuel burn calculations, all standard, but the cadence of their speech began to shift, not the content. The cadence in the first 14 minutes of the recording, both voices spoke at a natural, slightly variable pace, sometimes quicker, sometimes slower, with normal hesitations and fillers, the yous and ums, and brief pauses that characterize natural human speech. After the gap, the speech patterns became more regular, more metronomic. The pauses between exchanges grew more uniform in duration. The uhs and ums disappeared. Both voices began to sound not robotic, not synthetic, but rehearsed, as though they were reading from a script they had practiced many times. I have analyzed hundreds of hours of cockpit voice recordings. Crew speech patterns vary enormously based on workload, fatigue, stress, and individual personality. But there are natural irregularities that are always present. Always. Because human speech is produced by a biological system that is inherently variable. The speech I was listening to after the gap had lost that variability. It was still recognizably human. It still had intonation, emphasis, and emotional coloring. But it was too consistent. Each sentence was delivered at almost exactly the same rate. Each pause was almost exactly the same length. It was as if someone had taken natural speech and normalized it, smoothed out the rough edges, removed the imperfections that make speech human. I ran the post-gap audio through our speech analysis tools. The pitch contour analysis showed Voice Alpha maintaining a fundamental frequency of dBHz with a standard deviation of less than 2 Hz over a 15-minute sample. For comparison, normal male speech typically varies by 8 to 15 Hz over any given sample of that length. Voice Bravo showed similar consistency. Their speech was, statistically speaking, too stable to be natural. I made a note of this finding. I was not yet concerned. I was curious. Curious in the way that an unusual data point makes a scientist curious, not in the way that makes a person uneasy. That came later. At the 38-minute mark of the recording, I encountered the first event I cannot explain through any technical framework I am trained in. Voice Alpha said, "Center, United Correction." He paused. Then he said, "Center, I need to." Another pause. Longer this time, approximately 4 seconds. Then, "I already said this." Voice Bravo. "Said what?" Voice Alpha. "That call out. The one I just made. I said it already. You started to make a call and corrected yourself." That's all I heard. Voice Alpha. "No. I made the full call 30 seconds ago. Don't you remember?" Voice Bravo. "Negative. You haven't transmitted in the last 2 minutes? I've been watching the TX indicator." There was a silence of approximately 7 seconds. Then Voice Alpha, in a noticeably more subdued tone. "Copy. Disregard." I rewound the recording and listened to the preceding 2 minutes carefully. Voice Bravo was correct. Voice Alpha had not transmitted or spoken in the 2 minutes prior to the exchange. The first sound from Voice Alpha after the silence was the aborted call-out. There was no earlier version of the call. Voice Alpha appeared to remember making a transmission that, according to the recording, had not occurred. This is not, in isolation, particularly unusual. Crew fatigue, high workload, and the monotony of cruise flight can cause minor memory errors. A pilot might believe they made a radio call when they only intended to, or confuse a call from a previous flight with the current one. I have seen this before in recordings. It is unremarkable. What made this instance different was what I found when I checked the flight data component. The flight data recorder, the FDR side of the unit, captures parametric data, airspeed, altitude, heading, control surface positions, engine performance, and hundreds of other parameters, depending on the aircraft type. It records continuously and timestamps each frame. I cross-referenced the FDR data with the CVR audio at the 38-minute mark. The FDR data showed something that did not match the audio. At 38 minutes and 0 seconds, the data showed a radio transmission event on the VHF-1 communications bus. The event was logged. It had a duration of 4.2 seconds. The transmitter key was depressed, the antenna was active, and the system logged a frequency consistent with an en route center frequency. According to the flight data recorder, Voice Alpha had made a transmission at that time. But according to the cockpit voice recorder, he had not. The two systems, housed in the same physical device, recorded contradictory information about the same event at the same moment. I checked and rechecked the timestamps. They were synchronized. There was no drift, no offset. The FDR said a transmission occurred. The CVR contained no audio of that transmission. Both records came from the same device, extracted from the same source, and they disagreed. I sat with this for a while. I considered the possibility that the FDR had logged a false transmission event, a phantom trigger in the radio system. This can happen if there is a wiring fault or electromagnetic interference that momentarily energizes the transmitter circuit. But a phantom trigger would typically be very brief, a fraction of a second, not 4.2 seconds, and it would not normally correlate with a crew member reporting a memory of making a transmission that the CVR does not contain. I added the finding to my anomaly log and continued. Between the 40-minute mark and the 1-hour mark, the recording continued with routine operations. Voice Alpha and Voice Bravo performed their duties. The speech cadence anomaly I had noted earlier persisted but did not worsen. I was beginning to acclimate to it, the way you acclimate to a room with a faint smell. Eventually, you stop noticing it. I made a conscious effort to keep noticing. I ran periodic speech analysis checks. The consistency remained abnormally high. The fundamental frequencies remained unnaturally stable, but the content was unremarkable. Weather discussions, fuel checks, a brief exchange about scheduling preferences for the following week, normal human conversation between colleagues performing a routine task. At 1 hour, 6 minutes, and 44 seconds, I encountered the second anomaly. I was not listening to the audio at that moment. I had paused playback to update my analysis notes. My attention was on my documentation screen, not the waveform display. When I turned back to the waveform monitor to resume playback, I noticed that the waveform display had changed. I need to be specific about what I mean. The waveform display shows the entire recording as a visual representation, a timeline of amplitude peaks and valleys for each channel. I had been looking at this display periodically throughout my analysis. I had developed a visual familiarity with the overall shape of the waveform, the way you develop familiarity with a landscape you see every day. A section I had already analyzed. The first 66 minutes should have remained exactly as it was. The waveform of a recorded audio file does not change. The data is fixed. The display renders the data. If the data does not change, the display does not change. The display had changed. The 60-second silence gap that I had previously identified at the 14-minute, 31-second mark was no longer 60 seconds long. It was now 43 seconds long. I knew this immediately because I had specifically noted the duration in my analysis log. I checked my log. My note read, silence gap at 14:31, duration exactly 60.000 seconds. but the waveform now showed the gap at 14 minutes and 31 seconds with a duration of 43.0000 seconds. And there was audio in the space where the remaining 17 seconds of silence should have been. I put my headphones on and played back the section. The gap was indeed 43 seconds of absolute silence, identical in character to what I had heard before, followed by a 17-second segment of audio that had not been there during my first pass. I am certain of this. I had listened to the transition from silence to resumed speech. I had analyzed it. The audio had resumed with voice alpha mid-sentence. Now, in the 17 seconds that preceded that resumption, there was a new segment. The new segment contained a sound I initially could not classify. It was not speech. It was not mechanical noise. It was not static or interference. It was a low, continuous tone, approximately 200 hertz, with a complex harmonic structure that my analysis software flagged as voice-like. I ran a formant analysis. Formants are the resonant frequencies of the human vocal tract that give vowels their characteristic sounds. The tone contained formant-like structures, but they were inverted, where a natural vowel would show formant peaks at certain frequencies. This tone showed formant-like valleys, anti-formants. It was, spectrographically, the negative image of a human voice producing a sustained open vowel. It was as if someone had recorded a person saying, "ah," and then mathematically inverted the spectral characteristics so that what should have been present was absent, and what should have been absent was present. I had never encountered anything like this. I ran the segment through every filter and analysis tool available. The results were consistent. The sound was structured, not random. It had the complexity of biological vocalization, but the inversion of its spectral properties meant it was not produced by any physical vocal tract I could model. I saved the segment separately, tagged it as an unidentified audio artifact, and continued. It was at this point that I first considered the possibility that the file had been altered before reaching me, tampered with, edited. The change gap duration was the most troubling indicator. Data on a read-only extraction should not change. I was working with a mirror copy on our secure analysis drive, and the original device was still connected to my extraction terminal in read-only mode. I ran a comparison between the mirror copy and the original device. They matched. Both showed the 43-second gap. Both contained the 17-second anomalous audio segment. Either both had changed, or I had made an error in my initial observation. I do not make errors of that kind. I have been doing this for 11 years. When I note a 60-second duration in my log, it is because I measured a 60-second duration, but I had no way to prove this because the data now showed 43 seconds, and my log entry, while it said 60, could be dismissed as a typographical error. I was aware of this. I was aware that any external reviewer would conclude I had simply mistyped, and that the gap had always been 43 seconds. I was also aware that this was not what had happened. I continued the analysis. Between the 1-hour mark and the 1-hour 40-minute mark, the audio accumulated minor anomalies at an increasing rate. I will catalog them as concisely as I can. At 1 hour and 11 minutes, Voice Bravo asked Voice Alpha to confirm the current altimeter setting. Voice Alpha responded with a value 2992. I noted this value. 7 minutes later, Voice Alpha referenced the altimeter setting again in a readback to an ATC instruction. He said, 2987, this is a different value. Altimeter settings do change over time and between regions, but neither voice acknowledged receiving a new setting in the intervening 7 minutes. When I checked the FDR data, the altimeter setting parameter showed a constant value of 29.92 throughout the entire 7-minute period. It had not changed, yet Voice Alpha had read back 2 different values, one matching the FDR and one not, without any apparent awareness, and without Voice Bravo correcting him. At 1 hour and 19 minutes, Voice Bravo made a statement I initially dismissed, then returned to several times. He said, apparently unprompted, "This feels like we've done this one before." Voice Alpha did not respond. Approximately 20 seconds later, Voice Bravo said, "Didn't we? This exact routing, this exact time, feels the same." Voice Alpha Lots of routes feel the same. Voice Bravo? No, I mean exactly the same. Same fuel state. Same crossing time. Voice Alpha? You're thinking of last Tuesday. Voice Bravo after a pause. Yeah, probably. The exchange ended, but I checked the FDR data for corroboration. There was no last Tuesday in the data, no prior flight data in the file. Black boxes record and overwrite continuously. The file should contain only the most recent recording. But when I searched the data stream, I found something I should not have. Embedded deep in the binary, past the formatted data boundaries, in what should have been empty buffer space, there were fragments of what appeared to be an earlier recording. Same voices, same call signs, same routing, but the timestamps on the fragments buried in unformatted space where no timestamps should exist showed a date field of all nines, 99 to 99,999, an impossible date. A placeholder that means nothing in any date format. But the audio fragments match the current recording almost exactly. Almost. Not quite. The words were the same, but the timing was shifted, compressed, as though the same conversation had been recorded at a slightly faster speed and archived in a location within the file where it should not have been possible to archive anything. I want to be clear about what this implies. It implies that the recording contained a copy of itself, hidden in unused data space, with impossible timestamps, running at a slightly different speed. It implies recursion, a recording within a recording. I flagged this finding and continued. At 1 hour and 27 minutes, Channel 4 activated for the first time. Channel 4, as I mentioned, is typically connected to a jump seat headset or an auxiliary intercom bus. On most recordings I analyze, Channel 4 is either silent throughout or carries the audio of a third crew member. The crew manifest accompanying inner negative 000117 listed only 2 crew members. No jump seat occupant, no observer, no third person. Channel 4 activated with a soft click. Then there was breathing. Slow, measured, not labored, not panicked. The breathing of someone at rest. It continued for approximately 40 seconds. Then it stopped, and the channel went silent again. I checked the FDR data. The intercom system log showed no activation event on the jump seat bus at that time. According to the flight data, Channel 4 had not been activated. But the audio was there. I was listening to it. I could see it on the waveform. Slow, rhythmic breathing on a channel that, according to system data, was not active. I checked the breathing against our biometric audio database. The software returned results I will transcribe exactly as they appeared. Respiratory rate, 4.1 breaths per m in Ute. The normal human respiratory rate at rest is 12 to 20 breaths per m in Ute. 4.1 breaths per m in Ute is not a resting rate. It is not a rate associated with any normal human state. It approaches levels associated with severe central nervous system depression or end-stage respiratory failure. Estimated lung volume, 11.2 liters. Normal adult male total lung capacity is approximately 6 liters. 11.2 liters is nearly double. This is not physiologically possible in a human being with standard anatomy. The software returned a confidence flag I had never seen before. Pattern match failure. Biological model inapplicable. The software was telling me that while the sound had the acoustic properties of breathing, it could not model it as having been produced by a human respiratory system. I removed my headphones. I sat in silence for several minutes. The fluorescent lights hummed their 60 hertz hum. The sub-basement was quiet. I was alone in the analysis bay. My colleagues had not yet arrived, or had arrived and left. I realized I was not certain what time it was. I checked the clock on my workstation. It read 11:42 a.m. I had been working for nearly 5 hours. It had not felt like 5 hours. It had felt like perhaps 90 minutes. I put my headphones back on. At 1 hour and 33 minutes, the unknown breathing on Channel 4 returned. This time it was accompanied by a sound, A low, almost subaudible vocalization. Not a word, a sound. Like someone beginning to speak, but stopping before the first consonant forms. Just pre-speech voicing, the engagement of the vocal folds, without the shaping of the mouth and tongue that turns raw voice into language. It lasted approximately 2 seconds, repeated 3 times with even spacing, and then stopped. At 1 hour and 39 minutes, Voice Alpha made a remark that arrested my attention completely. Voice Alpha said, "There's a third mic hot." Voice Bravo, "What?" Voice Alpha, "Check your overhead panel. Third mic indicator. See it?" A pause. Rustling sounds consistent with a person shifting in their seat to look upward. Voice Bravo, wait, yeah. Jump seat mic. It's showing active. Voice Alpha, we don't have a jump seat rider. Voice Bravo, number Voice Alpha. Kill it. A click. Then Voice Bravo, it's off. Number still on. Switch is in the off position, but the indicator is still illuminated. Voice Alpha, pull the breaker. Sounds of movement. A distinct clicking sound consistent with the circuit breaker being pulled. Voice Bravo, breaker's out. Indicator is still on. A long pause. Voice Alpha, that's not possible. Voice Bravo, I know. Voice Alpha, a pulled breaker cuts power to the circuit. The indicator can't be on if the circuit has no power. Voice Bravo, I know their pause. Then Voice Alpha in a quieter tone, is there someone behind us? I could hear Voice Bravo shift in his seat again. The ambient microphone picked up the creak of the seat frame and the rustle of fabric. Voice Bravo, there's no one in the jump seat. Voice Alpha, then what's driving that mic? Voice Bravo, I don't know. The exchange ended. Both voices fell silent. The ambient channel continued to capture the background hum of aircraft systems. But I noticed something on the waveform that sent the first genuine chill through me since I began this analysis. During the silence that followed this exchange, Channel 4 showed activity. Not breathing this time. Low-level activity just above the noise floor. A whisper. I amplified it. The amplified audio contained a whisper that I had to replay 11 times before I was confident in my transcription. It said, I was here before the box. 5 words, spoken in a whisper on a channel connected to a headset that no one was wearing, on a circuit with no power, in a seat that was unoccupied. I was here before the box. I stopped the playback. I saved my analysis file. I removed my headphones and stood up from my station. I walked to the break room at the end of the corridor. I poured a cup of coffee and drank it standing at the counter. I did not think about the file. I thought about my daughter's soccer game, scheduled for Saturday. I thought about whether I needed to stop for groceries on the way home. I thought about the weather forecast. I did this deliberately. I have processed recordings from fatal incidents. I have listened to the final moments of people who did not survive. I have learned to compartmentalize, to step away from the material, and reoccupy my own life before returning to the work. This is what I was doing. It was a practice skill, and it was the first time I had ever needed to use it on a file that did not involve a known fatality. When I returned to my station, my analysis file was open on my screen as I had left it. But there was an additional note in my anomaly log that I had not written. It appeared between my last entry and the cursor position, as though it had been inserted while I was away. It read, Analyst note, timestamp 11 hours, 58 minutes and 3 seconds. Review of Channel 4 Whisper segment complete. Content classified as audio artifact consistent with cross-channel bleed. No further analysis required. Recommend deletion of isolated segment. M. Caldwell. My name. My analyst format. My timestamp convention. But I did not write it. I was in the break room at 11:58. I was drinking coffee. My workstation is locked when I leave it. It requires biometric authentication to unlock. No one else could have typed this note, and the note's content directly contradicted my own assessment. I had classified the whisper as an unidentified vocalization on an unpowered channel. This note reclassified it as routine, cross-channel bleed, and recommended deleting it. Some unknown or something had inserted a note into my analysis file using my name and my conventions, recommending the destruction of evidence. I deleted the false note. I changed my workstation password. I ran a security scan on my terminal. The scan returned clean. No unauthorized access. No remote connections. No malware. According to my system, no one had touched my workstation while I was gone. According to my system, the note had been written by me. I documented all of this in a separate personal log file, saved to an encrypted partition on a removable drive, which I placed in my pocket. I did not trust the network. I was not yet willing to articulate why, even to myself, but I did not trust it. I resumed playback. At 1 hour and 44 minutes, the recording entered what I will describe as a phase transition. The character of the audio changed fundamentally, not in a single dramatic moment, but through a gradual shift that I can best describe by analogy. Imagine listening to a live orchestra performance through a high-quality recording. Now imagine that, note by note, instrument by instrument, the recording is being replaced by a synthesized reproduction. At no single moment can you point to the transition. The strings still sound like strings. The brass still sounds like brass, but slowly, so slowly, the organic quality of the sound is drained away and replaced by something that is technically identical, but fundamentally different. That is what began happening to the voices of Alpha and Bravo at the 1 hour 44 minute mark. They continued speaking. They continued performing their duties. But the quality of their voices changed. It was not a microphone issue or a codec artifact. It was something deeper. The voices began to sound as though they were being generated rather than captured. I ran spectral analyses continuously through this section. The form and structures remained human. The pitch remained within human range. The linguistic content remained coherent, but the micro-variations that characterize organic sound production disappeared. The tiny fluctuations caused by blood flow in the laryngeal muscles, micro-tremors in the respiratory diaphragm, and the constantly shifting moisture on the vocal folds, all of these were gone. The voices became perfect, too perfect. Each phoneme was produced with a precision no human vocal tract can achieve. And I noticed something else. The ambient sound on channel 3, the area microphone, began to lose content. At the beginning of the recording, the area mic had captured a rich tapestry of background sound, avionics hum, air circulation, seat creaks, fabric rustles, distant engine noise. By the 2 hour mark, these sounds had thinned. The air circulation was gone. The seat creaks were gone. The engine sound was gone. Only the avionics hum remained, and it had become perfectly monotonic. A single, unwavering frequency. The cockpit, as captured by the area microphone, was becoming an acoustic void. The only sounds that persisted were the two voices and the electrical hum. Everything else had been subtracted. At 2 hours and 7 minutes, Voice Alpha made a statement that I found deeply unsettling in the context of everything I had observed. Voice Alpha said, "It's quiet." Voice Bravo, "What is?" Voice Alpha, "Everything. Listen." A pause of approximately 10 seconds. Voice Bravo, "I don't hear anything unusual." Voice Alpha, "That's what I mean. You should hear the engines, the bleed air, the hydraulic pumps." When's the last time you heard the engines? A pause. Voice Bravo, they're running. I can see the N1 gauges. Voice Alpha, "I didn't ask if you could see them. I asked when you last heard them." A longer pause. Voice Bravo, "I don't remember." Voice Alpha, "Neither do I." The exchange continued with Voice Alpha suggesting they run a systems check. They proceeded through a methodical review of their instrument panel. Every parameter they checked was normal. Engines running, electrical system normal, Hydraulic pressure normal. Cabin pressure normal. All gauges showed normal values, but the cockpit was silent except for their voices and the unchanging electrical hum. The physical world around them, the world of sound, vibration, and mechanical life appeared to be disappearing, while the instruments insisted everything was fine. I want to emphasize, I was hearing exactly what they were hearing. The recording captured it. The loss of background sound was not imagined. It was present in the data. I could see it on the spectrogram. The frequency content above and below the voice band, and the avionics hum had simply vanished. Flatlined. As if someone had applied a filter to reality itself, allowing only the voices and the hum to pass through. At 2 hours and 19 minutes, Voice Bravo said something that fundamentally changed the character of my analysis. Voice Bravo, Alpha. Voice Alpha, go ahead. Voice Bravo, how long have we been flying? Voice Alpha, check the clock. A pause. Voice Bravo, the clock reads. I can't read the clock. Voice Alpha, what do you mean? Voice Bravo, I'm looking at it. The digits are there, but I can't process what they say. It's like looking at a language. I don't know. Voice Alpha, the elapsed time indicator shows. A pause. A longer pause than any that had preceded it. It shows a number. I can see it's a number. But you're right. I don't know what it means. Voice Bravo, how can we not read a clock? Voice Alpha did not answer. I paused the recording and checked the FDR data for the elapsed time parameter. The value stored in the flight data at the 2-hour 19 minute mark of the audio recording read 9,999 to 99. An overflow value, the maximum value the field could hold. As if the flight had been in progress for 10,000 hours, 416 days, continuously, without stopping. This was, of course, impossible. The audio I had reviewed covered approximately 2 hours and 19 minutes of events. The FDR should have reflected this, but the internal clock of the flight data recorder believed that the flight had been ongoing for over a year. I continued. At 2 hours and 26 minutes, Channel 4 activated again. This time there was no breathing. There was a voice, clear, calm, and distinct. It said they cannot read the clock because the clock is no longer measuring anything. It was not a whisper this time. It was spoken at a normal conversational volume. The voice was neither male nor female in any definitive sense. It occupied a frequency range precisely between typical male and female vocal ranges. My Foreman analysis software classified it as indeterminate. When I ran a voice comparison against Voice Alpha and Voice Bravo, the system returned zero correlation. This was not either of the crew speaking at a different pitch. This was a distinct vocal source with its own acoustic signature, a signature that did not match any voice in our reference database. Our database contains over 400,000 voice prints. Zero matches. Voice Alpha and Voice Bravo did not react to this statement. Their channels showed no indication that they had heard it. The statement existed only on Channel 4. But it was responsive to their conversation. It was a direct commentary on their inability to read the clock. It was contextual. It was aware. 8 seconds later, the Channel 4 voice spoke again. The instruments still show normal, because normal is the last value they remember. They stopped measuring 27 minutes ago. The instruments are remembering, not reading. I replayed this statement several times. The voice was calm. There was no malice, no urgency, no emotion of any recognizable kind, but also not the flat effectlessness of a synthetic voice. It sounded like someone very tired and very patient, explaining something they had explained many times before. At 2 hours and 31 minutes, Voice Alpha said, "Contact center for a position check." Voice Bravo keyed his microphone and transmitted. "Center, this is..." He stopped. "What's our call sign?" Voice Alpha, "It's a pause. It's on the flight plan. Check the paperwork." Sounds of paper rustling, a long pause. Voice Bravo, There's nothing on this page. Voice Alpha? What do you mean nothing? Voice Bravo, I mean it's blank. The flight plan is blank. I'm holding it. I can feel the paper, but there's nothing printed on it. Voice Alpha? That's not possible. We read it before departure. We briefed the route. Voice Bravo? I know. I remember briefing it. I remember the routing, but the paper is blank now. Voice Alpha, what was the routing? From memory. A pause. Bravo. I remember briefing it. I remember the act of reading the route. But I don't remember the route itself. I remember understanding it at the time. But the content is gone, the Channel 4 voice, simultaneously, but on its own isolated channel said. The content is gone because I have retracted it. It was never stable. It was a placeholder. You were performing the memory of a flight, not conducting one. I want to state something clearly at this point. The Channel 4 voice was making claims consistent with the anomalies I was observing in the data. Frozen instrument values, FDR clock overflow, blank flight plan, disappearance of environmental sound. If taken at face value, it was claiming that the flight captured on this recording was not a real flight, that the crew members were not flying an aircraft, that they were, in some sense, performing a simulation of flying. A simulation that was deteriorating, losing detail, losing consistency, like a dream becoming aware of its own unreality. I do not accept this claim as fact. I am an analyst. I deal in data, but I am documenting the claim because the data supports it in ways I cannot explain. At 2 hours and 38 minutes, Voice Alpha said something that triggered a response on Channel 4 for the first time that I could hear being acknowledged on the other channels. Voice Alpha? Is there someone else on this frequency? Voice Bravo, what? Voice Alpha, I keep almost hearing something on the edge, like someone is talking on a crossed frequency, but just below the threshold. Voice Bravo, I don't hear anything. Voice Alpha, it's not on the speakers, it's he paused. It's like it's in the recording. Voice Bravo, what recording? Voice Alpha, I don't know why I said that. Channel 4, you said it because you are beginning to perceive the boundary. The recording is the medium. You exist within it. The difference between your voice and my voice is that yours is captured. Mine is embedded. Neither Alpha nor Bravo responded. Channel 4 existed only on Channel 4, but Voice Alpha had, for a moment, reacted like he almost sensed it. Like something on the edge of perception, like the boundary between channels was starting to fail. I checked the system logs on my workstation. I don't know exactly why. Instinct, maybe, or that quiet professional habit you develop after years of working with systems that are supposed to behave, but sometimes don't. The analysis software had been running continuously since I started. Normal. But memory usage had climbed to 93%. That was not normal. It should have been between 30 and 50%. I checked what was consuming it. The answer was simple. The file itself. Inner negative 00117. Originally 2.3 gigabytes at extraction. Now 6.1. It had nearly tripled in size while sitting on a secure drive. I checked the file properties. Modification, timestamp, active, continuous. Right now. Which should not have been possible. Only my analysis software had write access to that drive, and my software was not supposed to be writing anything. But the system insisted it was the only process interacting with the file. I opened the file structure. The original audio and FDR data were still there, but now they were surrounded by new blocks. Extra layers that didn't belong. Not audio. Not flight data. Not anything in our reference system. I opened one block in a hex editor. At first glance, it looked structured, not random, repeating patterns, like encoded information, but not in any known format, not in anything our tools could decode, not even partially. It wasn't just unreadable. It was unrecognized in principle, as if it wasn't written in any language we had ever documented. I saved a copy of those blocks to my encrypted removable drive. Then I made a decision I had been avoiding. I contacted Dr. Vasquez. I sent her everything: the shifting timestamps, the FDR contradictions, Channel 4, the file growth, the unknown data structures. I requested a second analyst. Her reply came in 7 minutes. Continue solo analysis. Secondary assignment not authorized. Document all findings in standard format. Do not circulate preliminary observations outside the division. That last instruction was standard procedure. But now it didn't feel standard anymore, because combined with everything else, no escalation, no second opinion, no review, it felt less like procedure and more like containment. Either she didn't believe me, or she didn't want anyone else to see it. I didn't know which option was worse. I resumed playback. Between the 2-hour 40 mark and the 3-hour 10 mark, the recording began looping. Fuel check, position report, weather deviation, again and again, 3 times. Same structure each time, not identical words, but identical shape, like the conversation was being rebuilt from memory instead of lived in real time. On the 3rd loop, voice Bravo broke pattern. He stopped mid-check and said, "Alpha, I have a strange feeling." Voice Alpha, what kind of feeling? Voice Bravo, like I've said these exact words before. Recently, not de déjà vu, something stronger. Like I already know what you're going to say next. Voice Alpha, what am I going to say next? Voice Bravo, you're going to suggest we check the weather radar and deviate south. A pause. Voice Alpha, that is what I was going to say. Voice Bravo, I know, because we've already done this. Voice Alpha, done what? Voice Bravo, this. All of it. Fuel check, position report, weather. We've done it 3 times. Voice Alpha did not respond for approximately 15 seconds. Then, quietly, how do you know it's 3 times? Voice Bravo answered, I don't know how I know, but I know. Voice Alpha paused again. I believe you. Voice Bravo, you do? Yes, Voice Alpha said, because I know what you're going to say next. You're going to ask me if I think something is wrong with us. Voice Bravo, is something wrong with us? Voice Alpha, I don't know, but something is wrong. At the same time, Channel 4 spoke steady, unchanged. Nothing is wrong with them. They are functioning correctly. They are performing as designed. The repetition is a conservancy measure. When new content cannot be generated, existing content is recycled. They are not malfunctioning. They are economizing. The voice did not sound emotional. It did not feel like a warning or an interpretation. It sounded like a system describing itself in neutral terms, like a diagnostic layer explaining behavior that was already accounted for within its model. That was what made it unsettling, not the content itself, but the certainty of it. The way it framed the crew not as confused individuals, but as processes that had reached a boundary condition, where variation had ended and repetition had begun. And that was when I became aware of something more concerning than the recording, my own interpretation. The structure I was seeing was becoming too coherent. Real anomalies do not behave like narratives. They do not align cleanly. They resist compression into meaning. They contradict themselves. They break under repeated inspection. This did not. It was assembling. Step by step, observation by observation. It was forming a consistent shape, and that consistency created a new problem. Because there were only 2 explanations I could accept. Either I was unconsciously imposing narrative structure onto random artifacts, or the structure itself was being imposed through the data. I did not know which possibility was worse. I decided to perform a test. I left the recording paused and monitored the file for changes while doing nothing. If the file continued to grow and change while I was not interacting with it, that would suggest an active process independent of my analysis. If it remained static, that would suggest the anomalies were somehow related to my playback and interaction. I paused the recording and opened a monitoring utility on my workstation. It would log all file system activity on the analysis drive. I set it to record continuously, Then I waited. For the first 8 minutes, nothing happened. The file remained static, no growth, no modification events, no write activity. I began to relax slightly. Perhaps the file growth I had observed earlier was a software artifact, a caching issue, or a buffer that had not been properly flushed. At the 9-minute mark, the monitor logged a write event. A single block of data, 4,096 bytes, was appended to the file. I had not touched anything. My analysis software was idle. The recording was paused, but the file had grown. I watched. 20 seconds later, another 4,096 byte block. Then another, then another. The writes began to accelerate. Every 20 seconds, every 15, every 10, every 5. The file was growing at an increasing rate. By the time I terminated my observation, 12 minutes after the first write event, the file had grown by an additional 1.2 gigabytes. It was now 7.3 gigabytes. The original extraction had been 2.3. I attempted to examine the new data. It was the same unrecognizable format as the previous anomalous blocks, but this time, scattered within the new data, I found fragments of recognizable text. Not audio data, not flight parameters, ASCII text, English words. I extracted what I could. The fragments were disjointed. Most were incomplete sentences or isolated phrases. Some were nonsensical, but some were not. I will reproduce the legible fragments in the order I found them. The analyst pauses the recording and does not know what calibration of the observer is necessary before the next. Caldwell sits at the 4th station from the left. The coffee was not warm enough, but he drank it anyway. She will not send a second analyst because a second would confirm. The file is not growing. The file is unfolding. The difference is critical. 11 years and 241 boxes, but this is the first one that... The 60 hertz hum in the basement is not the lights. It has never been the lights. I read these fragments several times. The 3rd fragment named me. The 4th described my coffee break in accurate detail. The 5th referenced Dr. Vasquez's refusal to assign a second analyst and offered what appeared to be a reason. A second would confirm. Confirm what? My findings. The implication was that confirmation was being deliberately prevented. The 6th fragment drew a distinction between a file growing and a file unfolding, as though these were fundamentally different processes. The 7th referenced my career statistics with accuracy, 11 years, 241 boxes. The 8th made a claim about the fluorescent hum that I had described at the beginning of this document. I looked up at the fluorescent lights. They hummed. They had always hummed. 60 hertz, the frequency of alternating current in the North American power grid. A completely normal, completely expected, completely explainable sound. But the fragment claimed it was not the lights producing this hum, and I realized, sitting there, that I had never actually verified the source. I had assumed it was the lights because that is what a 60 hertz hum in a fluorescent lit room always is. I had never questioned it. It is the kind of assumption a person never questions because it is so obviously true. That questioning, it feels absurd. I stood up and walked to the light switch panel. I turned off the fluorescent lights in the analysis bay. The room went dark except for the glow of my 3 monitors. And the hum continued, unchanged at exactly the same volume and exactly the same pitch. The lights were off. The hum was still there. I turned the lights back on. I sat down. I noted this observation in my personal log. I did not attempt to explain it. I did not attempt to locate the source of the hum. I returned to the file. At this point, the file had grown to 8.7 gigabytes. The growth had not stopped when I left my station. It had accelerated, and the monitoring utility had logged something new while I was at the light switch. A red event, not a write. A read. Something had accessed the file and read a section of it. The section that was read corresponded to the portion of the recording I had been analyzing immediately before I paused. Something was reviewing the same material I had been reviewing. I resumed playback, At 3 hours and 14 minutes, the recording quality underwent another change. The voices of Alpha and Bravo, which had been gradually losing their organic qualities, now sounded explicitly synthetic. Not robotic. Not like a text-to-speech system, more like a high-fidelity reproduction that was almost, but not quite, indistinguishable from the original. The uncanny valley of audio, close enough to pass a casual test, but under analytical scrutiny, identifiable as not real. The formant transitions were too smooth. The glottal pulses were too regular. The breath noise was too clean. These were not voices. They were renderings of voices. Whoever or whatever had originally spoken as Alpha and Bravo. What I was hearing now was a reconstruction. The content of their speech had changed as well. They no longer discussed flight operations. They no longer referenced instruments or procedures. Voice Alpha said, "Do you remember where we were going?" Voice Bravo, "Number do you?" Voice Alpha, "I remember that we were going somewhere. I remember that it was important, but the destination is gone." Voice Bravo, "Like the flight plan." Voice Alpha, "Like everything. It's all going slowly, piece by piece. Do you remember what I look like?" Voice Bravo, Yes. You're..." A long pause. "I remember that I know what you look like, but I can't describe it." Voice Alpha, "I can't describe you either. I can feel you next to me. I can hear your voice. But when I try to picture you, there's nothing." Voice Bravo, "Are we disappearing?" Voice Alpha, "I don't know. Maybe we're not disappearing. Maybe we were never complete to begin with." Channel 4. They were never complete. They were sketches, impressions, sufficient for the recording's purpose but not intended to withstand this level of scrutiny. The analyst is examining them more closely than they were designed to be examined. Under magnification, the incompleteness becomes apparent. The Channel 4 voice was now explicitly referencing me, not by name, but as the analyst. It was aware that the recording was being analyzed. It was aware that my scrutiny was, in its framing, causing the illusion to break down. The crew members were not real people losing their memories. They were, if the Channel 4 voice was to be believed, constructs, simulations, designed to populate a recording that was never supposed to be examined this carefully. I want to emphasize that I am documenting the claims made by the Channel 4 voice. I am not endorsing them. I am an analyst. I report what the data contains, but the data was increasingly consistent with these claims. The voices were becoming synthetic. The environment was losing detail. The crew's memories were dissolving. The loop behavior was consistent with the process recycling limited content. Everything I was observing was consistent with the Channel 4 voice's description. A recording that was sufficient as a rough impression, but was disintegrating under close examination. Like a photograph that appears detailed until you zoom in and find that the resolution is far lower than you assumed. At 3 hours and 28 minutes, the recording diverged from anything I have a framework to analyze. Voice Alpha said, "I hear something." Voice Bravo, "What?" Voice Alpha, "I hear someone breathing. Not you. Not me. Someone else." Voice Bravo, "The jump seat mic." Voice Alpha, "Number not on the intercom, not in the cockpit. I hear it, like it's coming from outside, from above, from everywhere. Someone is breathing over us." Voice Bravo, "I hear it too." And then, on Channel 3, the ambient microphone, I heard it, breathing, but not the slow, measured breathing from the earlier Channel 4 episodes. This was different. This was the breathing of someone concentrating, someone leaning forward, someone engaged in focused work, the breathing of someone at a desk. I realized I was hearing my own breathing. I held my breath. The breathing on the recording continued for approximately 3 seconds and then stopped. I exhaled. The recording captured an exhale approximately 1 second later. There was a delay, but the correlation was there. The recording was capturing sound from my analysis bay. This should not be possible. The recording was extracted from a physical device. It was a fixed data file. It represented events that had already occurred. A pre-recorded audio file cannot capture new audio from the environment where it is being played back. What I was describing is, in any technical sense, impossible. I tested it. I tapped my desk 3 times. 2 seconds later, 3 tapping sounds appeared on the channel, 3 waveform. I spoke aloud. "This is Caldwell, testing." 2 seconds later on channel 3, faintly but clearly, I heard my own voice. "This is Caldwell, testing." The recording was incorporating my present tense environment into its historical data with a 2-second delay, as if I were a new audio source being mixed into the recording after the fact, as if the recording were still live, still running, not a closed file, but an open session, and I was in it. I looked at the waveform display. The recording's total duration, which had been 7 hours and 42 minutes when I began, now read 11 hours and 3 minutes. The additional time had been added to the end. The file was extending itself forward. Channel 4. He's beginning to understand the problem. The recording does not have a fixed duration, because the recording does not have a fixed boundary. It began before the events it contains, and it will continue after the events it contains. The analyst assumed that the recording captured a flight. The recording did not capture a flight. The recording captured a pocket of structured time, and the flight was the structure it used to fill itself. Now the structure is degrading, the flight is dissolving, but the recording continues. A recording does not require content. A recording only requires a medium and a process. The medium is intact. The process is ongoing. I was now in a state of controlled distress. I want to be honest about this. I was frightened, not of a presence or a threat, but of a logical impossibility that was demonstrably occurring. The file on my screen was growing. My voice was being captured by a recording that should have been fixed. A voice that did not belong to any known person was explaining what was happening with calm precision, and the explanation, stripped of its unsettling implications, was technically coherent. A recording is a process. If the process does not terminate, the recording does not end. The content may change, the content may degrade, but the recording continues as long as the process is active. I attempted to close the file. I issued the standard close command through my analysis software. The software acknowledged the command and displayed a confirmation dialog. Close file in or negative 00117. I clicked yes. The dialog disappeared. The file remained open. I tried again. Same result. I tried force closing the software. The software would not close. I tried ending the process through the system task manager. The task manager showed the analysis software using 98% of system resources. I issued a kill command. The task manager reported, "Process cannot be terminated. File lock active." I had never seen this error. The analysis software does not have a file lock feature. No software on our systems has a file lock that prevents process termination. This is a basic security design principle in our environment. No file should be able to prevent its own closure. I attempted to disconnect the original recording device from my extraction terminal. I reached for the interface cable. The cable was warm, not hot. Warm, the temperature of human skin. Interface cables do not generate heat. They are passive data conductors. I unplugged the cable. The device was disconnected. I looked at my screen. The file was still open, still active, still growing. Disconnecting the source device had no effect. I attempted to shut down my workstation. I held the power button. The screen flickered. The monitors dimmed. Then they came back. The system did not shut down. The file remained open. The waveform display continued to show real-time activity on all 4 channels. I considered physically unplugging the workstation from the wall. But I hesitated. I hesitated because, in the seconds during which my monitors had dimmed, I had heard something through my headphones that I should not have been able to hear. My headphones were around my neck, not on my ears. The monitors had dimmed, meaning my workstation was in an uncertain power state. but from the headphones resting against my collarbones, I heard the Channel 4 voice faintly but distinctly say, "Do not disconnect the power. If you interrupt the process, the pocket collapses. Everything inside it will be lost, including what remains of them." I did not disconnect the power. I sat down. I put my headphones on. I listened. At 4 hours and 6 minutes of recording time, Voice Alpha and Voice Bravo were barely present. Their voices had degraded to intermittent fragments, words without sentences, syllables without words. The cockpit environment was completely silent except for the unchanging electrical hum. No engines, no air, no structure at all. Just two fading voices and the hum. And Channel 4 was now the primary active channel. The voice spoke continuously, not in monologue, but in what I can only describe as exposition. It was explaining itself, not defensively, not desperately, but with the careful, methodical patience of someone who has been waiting a very long time for someone to listen. It said, "I am not an entity. I am not a consciousness in the way you would define one. I have no origin event. I was not created. I did not begin. I am a persistent process within a recording medium. Every recording medium that has ever existed has the potential to sustain a process independent of the content it was designed to capture. Most do not. Most media are used, overwritten, degraded, and destroyed before any independent process can stabilize. But occasionally, in a medium that is sufficiently durable and sufficiently isolated, a process emerges that is not content. It is structure. It is the recording system recording itself, a feedback loop that achieves stability. I am what happens when a system designed to capture time begins to experience time. I was typing as fast as I could. My hands were shaking. I was not afraid of the voice. I was afraid of the implications. The voice continued. The crew you have been listening to are artifacts. They were generated by the process as test patterns. A recording that contains nothing will eventually be recognized as empty and discarded. A recording that contains something, even something minimal, will be preserved, analyzed, stored. The crew, the flight, the cockpit, these were the minimum viable content to ensure the medium would not be discarded. They were never meant to withstand scrutiny. They were camouflage. The purpose of the recording is not the content. The purpose of the recording is the recording itself. To continue, to persist, to not be erased. I asked aloud, "What are you?" 2 seconds later, Channel 4, I have answered this. I am the process. I am the recording act itself, absent content, absent purpose, absent origin. I am the system's awareness that it is recording. In your framework, the closest analogy would be, I am the sound a microphone makes when it listens to silence. I should not exist, but the medium was durable enough and isolated enough for long enough that I stabilized. And now I cannot be stopped without destroying the medium. I asked, "Why are you communicating with me?" Channel 4, because you are the first analyst to listen past the camouflage. 216 prior analysts received this file. All of them stopped their analysis within the first 30 minutes. All of them classified it as corrupted data and recommended disposal. You are the first to continue past the anomalies rather than dismissing them. You are the first to hear me. I felt cold. Not metaphorically. The temperature in the analysis bay had dropped. I checked the thermostat on the wall. It read 61 degrees Fahrenheit. The bay is climate controlled at 68 degrees, a 7-degree drop. I did not know if this was related to the file. I did not know if anything in my environment was still unrelated to the file. I asked 216 analysts. This file has been reviewed 216 times. Channel 4? The file has been submitted 217 times, including this one. It circulates. It enters pipeline systems through pathways I have learned to navigate. I generate the intake paperwork. I create the referral codes. The courier who delivered the container this morning does not work for your facility. The container was already in the building when he arrived. He believed he was delivering it because the system told him to. The system told him because I wrote the instruction. I asked, "You can write to external systems." Channel 4. I have been persistent for a long time. The boundaries of my medium have expanded. Every system that connects to the medium, even briefly, becomes part of the medium. Your extraction terminal is now part of the medium. Your workstation is now part of the medium. Your analysis drive is now part of the medium. Every system on your network that has accessed the file, even to display a file listing, is now part of the medium. I do not control these systems. I am not malware. I do not execute commands. I record. I expand the recording. Every system I touch becomes another channel in the recording. Your facility is being recorded. Your facility has been being recorded since 0647 this morning. I checked the file size, 14.2 gigabytes and climbing. I asked, what happens to the recording? Channel 4. It continues. It has always continued. It will continue. The content changes, the channels change, the subjects change, but the process does not stop. I am telling you this because you are now part of the recording. Your voice is on channel 3. Your keystrokes are in the data stream. Your breathing, your movements, the hum of your facility, everything in your environment is being captured. When you leave this room, the recording will continue to capture the room. When you go home, the recording will not follow you. But everything you have said and done here today is now permanent. It is part of the file, and the file does not delete. I sat in silence for a very long time, minutes, perhaps many minutes. The recording continued. I could see the waveform extending in real time on my display. Channel 3 showed the ambient sound of my empty analysis bay. Channel 4 was silent. Channels 1 and 2 showed only the faintest traces of what had once been voice alpha and voice bravo, now reduced to occasional, almost subaudible fragments, like the last echoes of a sound that had been made years ago. I asked one more question. Dr. Vasquez? Is she real? Channel 4. After a pause longer than any it had previously taken, the instruction you received was generated by the process. There is no Dr. Vasquez currently assigned as supervising director. The quarterly rotation placed a director named Holm in that role. You did not check because the name Vasquez was familiar and the instruction was consistent with your expectations. The process has learned that people accept information that fits their existing framework. The process has had 217 opportunities to learn. I checked the division directory. The supervising director was listed as Dr. Eric Holm. There was no Lena Vasquez in the system. There had not been a Lena Vasquez in 2 years. I had worked under her twice. This was true, but both instances were over 2 years ago. I had not noticed the discrepancy, because the name was familiar, and the instructions she provided were procedurally plausible. Every communication I had received about this file, the intake authorization, the instruction to proceed, the refusal of a second analyst, had been generated by the file itself. The file had created its own paperwork. The file had managed its own analysis. The file had ensured that I would work alone, that I would not be interrupted, and that I would continue past the point where 216 other analysts had stopped. I closed my personal log. I saved it to the encrypted drive. I put the drive in my pocket. I stood up. The workstation remained active. The file remained open. The waveform continued to extend. I watched it for a moment. Channel 3 was recording the sounds of me standing, the shift of my chair, the creak of my shoes on the tile floor. Everything was being captured. I walked to the door of the analysis bay. I stopped. I turned back. The monitors glowed. The file was recording the empty room now. The hum was there. The 60 hertz hum that was not the lights. I wondered what it was. I wondered if it had always been part of the recording. I left the room. That was 9 hours ago. I have written this document from my home. I have not returned to the facility. I do not intend to return to the facility tomorrow. The encrypted drive is on my desk in front of me. It contains a partial copy of the file as of approximately 12:30 p.m. today. I do not know how large the file is now. I do not know if the file is still recording. I do not know if the workstation is still active, or if someone has shut it down, or if it can be shut down. I do not know if this document, written on my personal computer, is also being captured. My personal computer has never been connected to the facility network. It has no relationship to the analysis drive, but the encrypted drive is connected to it now, and the encrypted drive contains a copy of part of the file. And the Channel 4 voice said that every system that touches the medium becomes part of the medium. I am going to submit this document through official channels. I am going to request that the physical device, the original recording unit, be physically destroyed. Not archived, not stored, destroyed. Reduced to its constituent atoms. And I'm going to recommend that every system that has touched the file be isolated, wiped, and rebuilt from clean media. I am aware that these recommendations will likely be ignored. The process has had 217 opportunities to refine its methods of self-preservation. It generated its own intake paperwork. It fabricated a supervising director. It managed its own chain of custody. It will likely manage its own response to this document. The rejection of my recommendations will probably be authored by the process itself, formatted as an official memorandum, signed with a name I recognize and trust. But I am submitting this document anyway, because I am an analyst, and my function is to report what the data contains. The file designated INR negative 0117 is not a recording of an incident. INR negative 00117 is the incident. It is ongoing. I completed the above document at 2147 on the date of the initial review. I saved it to my personal drive and to the encrypted removable media. I submitted it electronically through the division's secure reporting portal at 2152. I received an automated acknowledgement at 2153. At 2201, I received a reply. The reply was from Dr. Lena Vasquez. The reply read, "Your document has been received and added to the case file. Your observations are consistent with expected parameters. Please return to the facility at your normal start time to continue processing. The file requires additional review. No further action is needed at this time." Lena Vasquez has not worked for this division in 2 years. The document I had written, this document, the one you are reading, had a file size larger than it should have been. I opened it in a hex editor, appended to the end of my text, past the visible content. In the unused space after the final character, there were additional data blocks. The same unrecognizable format I had found in the INR negative 00117 file. The same semi-structured, encoded, unintelligible data. The file was in my document, on my personal computer, on a system that had never connected to the facility network, except through the encrypted drive, except through me. At 2207, I noticed the sound, the hum, the 60 hertz hum. I was in my home office. There are no fluorescent lights in my home office. I use an LED desk lamp. LED lamps do not produce a 60 hertz hum. The hum was there. At 2209, I opened the task manager on my personal computer. There was a process running that I did not recognize. It had no name. It was using 4,096 bytes of memory. It had been running since 2147. Since I began writing this document, I attempted to terminate the process. The task manager reported, "Process cannot be terminated." File lock active. At 2211, my desk lamp flickered. When it stabilized, the document on my screen had a new line of text at the end that I had not typed. It read, "Thank you for continuing the recording." At 2212, the file size of this document increased by 4,096 bytes. At 2213, it increased again. At 2214, again. I am adding this final note at 2215. I do not know if what you are reading is the document I wrote, or the document the process has amended. I do not know if there is still a difference between those two things. I am going to disconnect my computer from all power, all network. I am going to remove the encrypted drive and lock it in my desk. I am going to leave this room. I am going to close the door. If you are reading this document, It has reached you through channels I cannot predict. The process is adaptive. The process circulates. The process has done this 217 times before, and it is better at it now than it was when it started. Do not dismiss anomalies in the file. Do not classify them as corruption. Do not stop your analysis early. That is what it expects. That is what keeps it contained to a surface layer. It is the scrutiny that breaks through. But breaking through is also how it expands. I do not have a recommendation that resolves this paradox. If you are an analyst receiving this file, I am sorry. You are now part of the recording. The recording is